He moved through the school corridor, a ghost of a presence, silent, still, and all but invisible, except for one thing that singled him out. It was camouflage every day. Not to be fashionable, not to be flashy, but because to him, it held a very personal meaning. Most kids never questioned why. They just mocked. They rolled their eyes, whispered behind his back, and gave him a nickname that stuck, Army Boy. And though he never spoke up or fought back, the taunting only intensified. But occasionally the ones who appear the quietest have the loudest truth. This is the tale of Isaiah, a 13-year-old boy whose strength in silence grew louder than the laughter that attempted to swallow it up. We've all known someone like Isaiah, or maybe we've been him, the one who doesn't quite fit in, not because they're broken, but because they're built a little differently. In a world that praises loud confidence, what happens to the kids who lead with humility, who carry a kind of strength that doesn't shout, but simply is? And what do we truly know about those we judge too hastily? The one who walks a bit slower, talks a bit softer, and has a sense of purpose the rest of us don't quite comprehend. Isaiah didn't seek attention. He sought to be understood. What he wore was not mere clothing. It was his affiliation with someone he looked up to deeply. You know, his dad wasn't home most mornings to take him to school or yell encouragement at games. His dad was in the air, flying sorties that most of us only catch snippets about. And the camouflage Isaiah wore every day was his way of saying, I'm proud, I'm connected, I remember. But middle school isn't always a gentle place for quiet pride. It's boisterous, combative, and usually oblivious to what truly counts. And yet, something remarkable lay in wait, just over the horizon, a moment that would translate every sneer into quiet and every whisper into wonder. When career day rolled around, the last thing anyone was expecting was a boom of thunder rattling the windows of the school, a blast of wind whizzing across the football field, and a Black Hawk helicopter softly landing where kids generally played tag. And out of that helicopter came a man who didn't need to prove anything, because his arrival itself rewrote the tale his son had been silently carrying around all along. At that instant, the truth towered above all the abuse. The message was plain but deep. True strength isn't always apparent until it's most needed. It's in the boy who continues to walk amidst laughter. It's in the father who appears not to brag, but to stand with his child in silent pride. And it's in the transition we sense when we finally get someone we thought we'd already gotten. This isn't merely a tale of a camouflaged boy. It's a tale of dignity, respect, and how often the smallest acts of bravery make the biggest impact. So today, as we enter Isaiah's life, ask yourself, who are the individuals in your life who are silently bearing burdens you've never even seen? And what would it take to finally see them for who they are? Because in the end, it's not the noise that teaches us, it's the stillness. Let's begin. You ever notice how some children just don't fit in, not because they're odd or anything, but because the world around them just doesn't take the time to see who they truly are? That's what happened to a shy, well-behaved 13-year-old boy named Isaiah. He had recently relocated to a small town in North Carolina with his family and moved in close to the nearby Army base where his father was stationed. His father was a well-respected Black Hawk helicopter pilot, the sort of guy who didn't say much but exuded calm control. Isaiah couldn't help but admire him. And every day, as a silent respect to the man he idolized, Isaiah dressed in camouflage, not merely a random shirt or cap on occasion. He came to school dressed in full camo regalia.
Pants, jacket.
Even his backpack coordinated. It was his own personal way of remaining close to his dad, particularly when he was off on base. But middle school doesn't always treat kids who don't fit in nicely. Teasing began the first week. Children would whisper as he walked by and ask him if he were lost on the way to the woods. Others laughed openly, calling him Army Boy or making fun of him as if he were about to fight squirrels. Others would nod at him in gym or in the cafeteria, laughing behind their trays. Isaiah never reacted. He didn't yell back, didn't bother teacher, didn't switch clothes. He just walked the halls in quiet dignity, always ahead of him, always calm. Some considered him shy. Others thought he just didn't care. But what they didn't know was that behind that tranquil face was a heart full of pride, a pride based on the things his father had instilled in him: strength, respect, and discipline. Isaiah wore camouflage not to be different, but because it made him feel strong, because it was a reminder of home, of honor, and something greater than himself. He wasn't acting different. He was just attempting to keep being himself. But days went by, and the teasing did not cease. It intensified, and despite Isaiah's best efforts to be tough, a simmering storm brewed behind those unchanging eyes. One that no one, not even Isaiah's classmates or teachers, saw coming. Now you understand how middle school is, packed with rough transition, shifting friendships, and an unforgiving glare on anything or anybody who takes the risk of being different. And for Isaiah, the teasing didn't just persist, it grew worse. What began as offhand remarks and snickers in the hallway soon escalated to louder jokes,
overt taunts, and eventually even cruel pranks.
Children who hardly knew him were brave enough to laugh in his face, and his daily camouflage, his secret badge of pride, became their punchline. One lunchtime, it turned brutally ugly. While Isaiah sat by himself at the far end of the cafeteria table, unruffled and calmly munching on the same turkey sandwich his mom sent him off with every day, a pack of boys strode by and suddenly launched open ketchup packets at him, shouting, "Camouflage won't cover you up anymore, soldier boy." The red splattered his green and brown camo, as if intentionally, provoking gasps, guffaws, and pointing fingers from around the lunchroom. The air was filled with the type of immature ugliness only middle school students could create. Isaiah didn't bathe in their glory for once. He stood up peacefully, blotted what he could with a napkin, grabbed his tray, and sat back down again, continuing lunch, as if nothing had occurred. But that quiet strength wasn't ignored, not by everyone. A young girl named Emily, having witnessed it all from only a few rows of seats away, gradually made her way over and sat beside him. She remained quiet for a while, then, following an awkward silence, she quietly asked, "Why do you wear camo every day?" Isaiah met her questioning gaze with tranquil, unwavering eyes and replied in a manner far greater than his years. "Because my dad instilled in me to be prepared," he said, "and never to be embarrassed about who I am." He smiled then, a gentle, genuine smile that conveyed more than words ever would. That was all he would say. No diatribe, no anger, just truth. The teachers had witnessed the bullying by this point. Some had even intervened on occasion, but Isaiah never reported anything, never sought assistance. He did not wish to cause a scene or bring more attention. His dad had always cautioned him, "True strength does not have to yell. It is demonstrated by how you present yourself when nobody is looking." And Isaiah walked that daily, even when the pressure of it must have weighed 1,000 pounds. He appeared at school the following day, wearing the same camo jacket, same serene face, like nothing had occurred. But something had changed, deep down beneath the surface. Something was incubating, not in anger, not in revenge, but in steady determination. And it all culminated just a few weeks later, on a day that was meant to be unremarkable. Career. Kids were abuzz with excitement, eager to learn what type of work their classmates' parents did. Posters decorated the walls, name tags were made out, and the auditorium was packed. Isaiah sat close to the back, as usual. His name had not been called yet. Not that anyone had any great expectations. Actually, some of the same boys who had hurled ketchup at him murmured, "Bet his dad's a retired mall cop," and giggled. But they had no idea what was coming. Undefined. Career day at school was always such a big deal, something the students anticipated every year with increasing enthusiasm and a little bit of nervous energy. Parents arrived wearing their uniforms or office attire, name tags proudly displayed, as they gave presentations on their careers to wide-eyed middle schoolers who were still trying to determine who they wanted to be one day. The gym was littered with folding chairs, a tiny stage, and a microphone that howled intermittently. But all of that didn't matter. A day about dreams, potential, and for some of the children, bragging rights. Isaiah sat at the back, serene and reserved as always. He heard respectfully as the other parents were called: bankers, real estate agents, nurses, small business proprietors, each with stories of commitment, education, and diligence, all just perfectly respectable occupations. But as the roster of speakers dwindled, a few of the very same boys who had goaded Isaiah for weeks couldn't resist. One leaned over and grumbled loud enough to hear,
Guess Army Boy's dad couldn't tear himself away from video games long enough to show up, and there was a snicker or two. Isaiah didn't flinch. He just kept his hands in his lap, fingers folded, eyes straight ahead. But something in the atmosphere was changing. As the last speaker finished speaking about a career in IT security, a low, peculiar rumbling noise sounded throughout the gym, soft at first like thunder far away. Some teachers stopped speaking in mid-sentence. Some students glanced around in confusion, and then the ground began to vibrate softly under their feet. That was when someone yelled out, "What is that noise?" Rumbling louder, deeper, more rhythmic, until it was unmistakable. The pounding, powerful poom 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 of helicopter blades cutting through air with intent. Chairs scraped as children ran to the high windows of the gym, pushing to take a glimpse. Teachers attempted to hold them back, but even they were tilting their heads. Outside, leaves and dust lashed across the football field as a huge Black Hawk helicopter swooped down from the air. The plane moved with heaviness and elegance, its black body shadowing the grass with a great length. The scene was like a film. It was impossible. It was impossible. It was dramatic, and it was very real. It landed softly on the field, wind and noise blasting through the open windows. For a few seconds no one spoke. Then the side door of the helicopter opened with a stiff metallic hiss. Out came a tall man in complete army flight uniform, zip jacket, shined boots, helmet carried confidently under one arm. He strode purposefully, not hurrying, not one-upping. The name on his chest was Chief Warrant Officer Daniels, Isaiah's father. You could practically sense the room's collective understanding sweep over them. The same kids who had bullied Isaiah, who had mocked his uniform, thrown ketchup packets at him, called him Army Boy, stood now in stunned silence, mouths half agape, eyes buggy with surprise. One of them stuttered, "Wait, that's his dad." The pilot, fully dressed, walked from the helicopter to the gym doors, where aides hurried to meet him. He stepped into the room, stood up straight, and in a calm but firm tone said, "Good morning. I'm here to speak on behalf of my son Isaiah, and to share what it means to serve in the United States Army." The room fell completely silent, and for the first time, every eye in the gym was on Isaiah, not with judgment, but with awe. You might have been able to hear a pin drop in that gymnasium, as the tall, broad-shouldered figure stepped inside the doors with understated authority, his every step of polished boots ringing off the wooden floor like the beat of discipline and power. He surveyed the room peacefully, eyes flicking briefly over the shocked faces of students and staff, before settling on one very familiar one near the back, his son Isaiah. And when he smiled, it wasn't a grand or dramatic gesture. It was soft, proud, and full of unspoken understanding between a father and son, who had already walked through more in life than most people realized. Then he stepped up to the podium, adjusted the microphone with precision, and in a deep, steady voice said, "Good morning, I'm Isaiah's father, and I'm a Black Hawk pilot for the United States Army." The reaction was immediate. Some jaws dropped, eyes widened. The very same boys who had spent the last few weeks mocking Isaiah's camouflage outfits suddenly looked like they'd swallowed their own words. One of them muttered, almost in disbelief, "That's his dad." But no one laughed this time. Disbelief, "That's his dad." But no one laughed this time. The atmosphere had shifted completely. Officer Daniels did not come to lecture or posture. He came to instruct. He spoke not in a loud voice or displays of drama, but with a soft, centered power that had everyone in attendance hanging on his every word. He told them about the years of training it took to become a pilot, the early mornings, the high-pressure decisions, and what it meant to fly a Black Hawk into unpredictable situations, sometimes to deliver aid, sometimes to rescue others, and always with one mission in mind, to serve and protect. He explained that wearing a uniform wasn't just about looking sharp, it was about honoring those who came before, and those who stood beside you. He talked about discipline, sacrifice, and the kind of courage that doesn't shout from rooftops, but shows up consistently, even when no one's watching. And then, in a moment that rendered the room completely still, he shifted slightly in his direction and spoke. "My son Isaiah wears camouflage not to be noticed, but to recall who he is and where he's from. He wears it because he's proud of the world we inhabit, and he never once asked to be understood, only respected. I hope that all of you find something in your life that you're proud enough to wear every day, even if the world doesn't understand. There was no clapping at first, just silence. A moment so rich it didn't require noise to leave a mark. And Isaiah, he didn't stand up or puff out his chest. He sat still, calm and composed as always, but his gaze rose, and when he locked it with his father's, there was a flash, one of pride, of love, and of subdued victory. The students around him, who once snickered and whispered, were quiet now, not from fear, but from respect. Isaiah said very little that day. He did not have to, because every now and then, the most powerful voices belong to those who prefer to speak using their actions, their integrity, and their silent refusal to be anything less, than themselves. From that memorable day on, Isaiah strode the corridors of his school slightly taller, not because he was proud or wanted to show anyone up, but because something deep and strong had changed. The truth of himself, and the quiet strength he bore each day, had at last been recognized for what it was. He no longer had to hide behind muteness, or brush off laughter. He no longer had to hide behind muteness, or brush off laughter. The same camouflage that had once marked him out now was a silent badge of honor, and others saw. Some of the very same boys who belittled him weeks before managed to make their way to him in the hall, and nervously but sincerely made overtures of apology. They didn't always get the words right, but the attempt counted. Others said nothing, just ceased sneering and whispering, and began to look at Isaiah in a different light, to look up to him rather than laugh at him. He hadn't changed, but they had. The teasing stopped, replaced with respect that hadn't been requested,
but only gained through patience and composure. And Emily, the girl who had been kind to Isaiah when no one else would, never left his side again. She ate lunch beside him each day, not out of sympathy, but because she recognized a depth and stillness of maturity that escaped his years. They conversed more about school, about life, even about his dad's tales, and a friendship developed in the uncomplicated manner the best ones usually do, quietly and truthfully. And whereas the image of that Black Hawk descending onto the school football field was and has continued to be an indelible one for all who witnessed, what lingered with them even more was what it showed. You see, life also teaches us in the thunderous, unforgettable ways. A helicopter rattling the windows, a soldier entering a school gym in boots laden with years of service, a room becoming silent in the presence of something real. But most often, life teaches us its most vital lesson, quiet acts of courage, through a boy who decided to wear camo not to be seen, but to remain attached to his principle, through a young man who, despite ridicule, remained respectful, steady, and true to himself. That's the sort of strength that doesn't get weaker with age or time. That's the sort of lesson that holds true with us long after the commotion has ended. Because ultimately it reminds us all, regardless of our age, that sometimes the bravest thing we can do is just be ourselves. Sometimes, though, life doesn't challenge a big thing or loud choice, but with the silent moments when we're asked to stand firm in who we are even when nobody else appears to be getting it. Isaiah's tale reminds us that dignity does not necessarily manifest wrapped in ovation or acceptance. It quietly appears in silence, in the manner we hold ourselves when the world is not paying attention, in the courage it takes to be tender when judged. We have all had those moments where being true to oneself feels isolated or even misinterpreted. But those are the moments, as difficult as they are, that possess a subtle strength. They define character. They remind us that being different is not something to be ashamed of, but to be proud of. And when others eventually see us not for what we wear or speak, but for what we hold in our hearts, that's when true connection truly. Isaiah didn't have to scream back or struggle for respect. He simply lived it, step by step, and that quiet strength resonated hearts far louder than any words ever could. And perhaps that is the soft reminder that we all need, to realize that sometimes the greatest kind of influence doesn't result from bullying others into seeing our worth, but living in a manner that never questions. Ultimately, it's not the noise we create, but the truth we embody. FNAF song. So wherever you are in your path, if you've been wearing your own form of camouflage, some aspect of yourself that others haven't yet gotten, hold on to it quietly with pride, because one day someone will at last behold it for what it truly is: courage, undefined, and that is enough. Undefined.